Texas, May 19, 1836. Fort Parker. A 17-year-old girl watches her father-in-law collapse after a single blow. Her mother-in-law falls beside him, bleeding into the dirt. Before shock can turn into sound, hands grab her from behind and drag her away. She is thrown onto a horse and carried off as the settlement disappears behind her. She is 6 months pregnant. Her name is Rachel Plummer, and for the next 21 months, she will endure experiences so devastating that even years later, safe in her father's home, she refused to describe them fully. In her own published memoir, she wrote only this: "To undertake to narrate their treatment would only add to my present distress, for it is with feelings of the deepest mortification that I think of it, much less speak or write of it." Rachel Plummer was not an exception. During the 1800s, across the American Southwest, frontier settlements were repeatedly raided. Hundreds of women were taken. Some were eventually returned after months or years of negotiation. A few escaped during moments of chaos, walking hundreds of miles back towards civilization. Most were never seen again, and those who did return carried stories that followed them for the rest of their lives. Stories they struggled to speak aloud. Stories so disturbing that even 19th century newspapers, which regularly printed graphic accounts of public executions, sometimes refused to publish them in full. This is not legend. These are documented cases, court testimonies given under oath, memoirs written by survivors themselves and sold to thousands of readers who wanted to know what truly happened beyond the edge of the frontier. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, support this channel, because what comes next is not what your teacher ever mentioned, because every raid followed the same pattern. They came at dawn or dusk, when light was uncertain and families were most vulnerable. Isolated homesteads were the easiest targets, cabins miles from the nearest neighbor, places where no one would hear what followed. The men were dealt with first: husbands, fathers, brothers, sons old enough to carry a rifle. Usually within minutes. There was no negotiation, no warning, no mercy, just speed. Then came the selection. Women of childbearing age were considered valuable. They could work. They could be traded to other tribes or sold through established markets across the northern territories. They could be forced into new lives and made to raise children who would grow up knowing no other world. Young girls were taken for a different reason. Given time, they would forget their names, their language, even their families. They would become someone else entirely. The elderly were left behind. They could not keep pace. Infants were considered dangerous, not for who they were, but for the sound they made. A crying child could reveal a group's position. The process was not emotional, it was practical. In February of 1851, 14-year-old Olive Oatman learned this near the Gila River in Arizona. Her family had been traveling west with other settlers, but disagreements over the route left them alone. They believed they were only days from safety. They were wrong. In a matter of minutes, Olive's family was gone. When the violence ended, only Olive and her 7-year-old sister, Mary Ann, were still alive. They were forced into the desert immediately. Olive later described walking barefoot through the night over sharp stone and thorn-filled ground. No food, no water, no rest. Every stumble was corrected, every delay punished. Her little sister walked beside her, injured and silent, too frightened to cry, too exhausted to speak. By dawn, Olive's feet were so damaged that every step felt unbearable. But stopping meant something worse, and this was only the first night. Once captives reached camp, their new existence began at once. There was no recovery period, no transition, no mercy. They were expected to work immediately, long before their bodies had recovered. They carried water for miles, gathered firewood until their hands split, dug for food in packed soil under relentless sun. They ate only what remained after everyone else had finished. Sometimes nothing at all. They slept exhausted. They woke before dawn, and the cycle repeated. Rachel Plummer later wrote, "I was kept constantly at work from earliest dawn until late at night. When I failed to perform my tasks to their satisfaction, I was punished. My life was one of constant dread and misery. Discipline came without warning, for working too slowly, for showing weakness, for speaking English to another captive, sometimes for no reason that could be explained, except that there were no consequences." Olive Oatman spent an entire year under these conditions. Her little sister did not survive it. At just 7 years old, Mary Ann grew weaker with each passing week. Olive watched helplessly as the child she had promised to protect slowly faded in front of her. There was nothing she could do. But survivors later said the labor and hunger were not what broke them. What broke them was what happened when they disobeyed, or when they hadn't done anything wrong at all. In 1838, Matilda Lockhart was taken at the age of 13. She spent 2 years in captivity before being returned during negotiations in San Antonio. When she was finally seen by American officials, men who believed they understood frontier violence stood in stunned silence. A woman named Mary Maverick, who helped care for Matilda after her return, later wrote of injuries so severe that words struggled to describe them. Matilda herself, barely able to speak, explained quietly how her captors had turned suffering into routine, how pain became a kind of game. And this was only the beginning of what captivity meant. They learned quickly that pain could be used for more than punishment. Matilda Lockhart was often woken in the middle of the night, not by shouting, not by orders, but by sudden, searing contact against her face. Her nose became their favorite target. Night after night, week after week, month after month, her reactions were entertainment. By the end, there was little part of her body that had not been marked in similar ways. Arms, back, legs, evidence of cruelty that went far beyond discipline. This was not about correction. It was not about control. It was about suffering for its own sake. Mary Maverick, the woman who helped care for Matilda after her release, wrote that the girl was so broken she could barely lift her head. Not from weakness alone, but from shame, fear, and exhaustion layered so deeply they could not be separated. Matilda Lockhart never recovered. Not physically, not mentally, not spiritually. She died 2 years after her return. Her body simply gave out. Her will followed soon after. She was 15 years old. Fire, survivors said, was a tool that inspired fear because it could be controlled, used carefully, used deliberately. Sometimes, captives were restrained and left exposed, while heat was applied slowly, meant to last. These acts were often reserved for sending messages to enemies, to other captives, to anyone watching. More often, heat was used casually, as routine discipline, as a warning, as a reminder. A piece of metal warmed too long, coals placed where they would not be forgotten. A sudden jolt meant to wake, to correct, to humiliate. Over time, the reaction became expected, almost ordinary, but the most terrifying use came as revenge. In March of 1840, during what was meant to be a peace negotiation in San Antonio, several Comanche leaders were killed inside the council house. Word traveled fast. The retaliation did not fall on soldiers, it fell on captives. 13 prisoners were restrained and left exposed. Fires were built nearby, not large enough to end things quickly. Small fires, controlled fires. Fires designed to last. The ordeal stretched on for hours. Among them was Matilda Lockhart's younger sister. She was 6 years old. Weeks later, when another Comanche band arrived to negotiate for different captives, they brought someone who had survived. That survivor described what had happened. Every detail, every sound, the message was unmistakable. Defy us, and everyone you love will pay. Pause for a moment and consider this. Women who had never raised a weapon, farmers' wives, daughters, mothers, children, taken from everything familiar and subjected to years of calculated suffering. Some were held for months, some for years, some for decades. What would you have done in their place? How long could you have survived? There was another ordeal. Captives faced almost immediately, one designed to break them before they ever settled into captivity. It was called running the gauntlet. The captive was forced to pass between two long lines of warriors. Each person struck as they passed. The goal was simple: reach the end without falling. Those who collapsed were forced up again. Those who could not rise faced consequences worse than exhaustion. The gauntlet served several purposes. It was a celebration of the raid. It was entertainment, and it was a test. Those who showed resolve, who stayed silent, who kept moving no matter how many times they were struck, sometimes earned slightly better treatment afterward. Those who showed weakness marked themselves for more abuse. Rachel Plummer endured the gauntlet more than once during her 21 months in captivity. She learned through experience that showing pain only encouraged more cruelty, that crying only made things worse. They respected bravery more than anything, she later wrote. I wish I had known it sooner. By the end of her captivity, Rachel had learned to resist. When one of her captors attacked her, she fought back with such force the nearby warriors laughed and cheered, not because they were kind, but because they admired defiance. From that day on, her treatment improved, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Most captives never learn this lesson. They weaken slowly, day by day, until they died in captivity, or were returned to families who barely recognized them. Some women faced a different fate. They were taken as wives. On the surface, this could appear better. They ate with the tribe instead of after. They endured less random punishment. They had a defined place in the social order, but choice was never part of the arrangement. Young women were given as rewards for successful raids, expected to fulfill every role demanded of them. Resistance was answered until resistance ended. Some women eventually accepted these lives, not because they wanted to, but because acceptance was the only way to stay alive. Cynthia Ann Parker was taken at age 9 in the same raid that captured Rachel Plummer. She did not spend months in captivity. She spent 24 years. She grew up Comanche, learned the language, the customs, the beliefs. She married a war leader named Peta Nakona and had 3 children, one of whom would become Quanah Parker, the last great chief of the Comanche. By all accounts, Cynthia Ann loved her family, loved her life. When Texas Rangers found her in 1860, she did not want to leave. She fought, she begged. She screamed for her husband. She was taken anyway. Her husband died shortly after. Her sons escaped and vanished from her life forever. Only her infant daughter was taken with her. For Cynthia Ann, the rescue was not freedom. It was a second captivity. She spent the rest of her life trying to return to the only family she remembered. She never succeeded. She was watched constantly by people who believed they were protecting her. She died in 1870, heartbroken. Some historians believe she simply stopped eating after her daughter died of illness, that she chose death rather than live among people who were now strangers. She had been saved, and it destroyed her. Perhaps nothing reveals the true brutality of frontier captivity more clearly than what happened to children. Rachel Plummer's 2-year-old son, James, was taken from her during the raid on Fort Parker. She never saw him again during her captivity, but it was her second child whose fate would haunt history. 6 months into captivity, Rachel gave birth to a son. For 6 weeks, she cared for him as best she could, working, hiding him when possible, clinging to the fragile hope that somehow he might survive. Then she was told the child was slowing her work. In her own words, They took my child from me. I never saw him alive again. Rachel was 20 years old. She was eventually ransomed. When her father saw her again, he barely recognized his own daughter. She was gaunt, scarred, and her eyes carried something that had not been there before. She wrote her memoir, one of the earliest captivity narratives ever published in Texas. She tried to rebuild a life. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a healthy son. 2 months later, her body failed. She died before she could truly recover from what captivity had taken from her. Her first child, James the 2-year-old, torn from her arms, was eventually returned to the family in 1842. He was 8 years old by then. He had spent 6 years among the Comanches, long enough to forget his birth family entirely. Freedom did not feel like home. Olive Oatman was released after 5 years among the Mojave. Unlike her earlier captivity, her time with them had been complicated. She had been adopted, given land to farm, marked with sacred tattoos, but she was still not free. When she finally walked into Fort Yuma in 1856, she weighed barely 80 pounds. She struggled to speak English. Words came slowly, as if pulled from another language, and across her chin, 5 blue lines told her story before she ever opened her mouth. Olive became famous. Lecture tours, a published book, a symbol of frontier survival. She married, lived quietly for decades, but she never fully returned to who she had been. Her husband reportedly spent years buying and destroying copies of her memoir, hoping to protect her from a past that refused to loosen its grip. Olive kept a small jar of Mojave mesquite seeds on her shelf until the day she died, a reminder of a life she could never fully leave behind. By the 1870s, historians estimate that at least 30% of Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache populations had captive ancestry. The line between settler and native was far blurrier than 19th century Americans wanted to admit, far more complex than the neat stories of civilization versus savagery printed in newspapers. Some captives fully assimilated. They learned the language, adopted the customs, married, raised children who grew up knowing no other world. When rescue parties finally found them, when families traveled hundreds of miles to bring them home, they refused to leave. They had become someone else. Others returned broken, living reminders of what they had endured. People who startled at sudden movement, who woke screaming decades later, who could never explain to their families what had happened because the words simply did not exist. And thousands disappeared entirely. No memoirs, no testimonies, no graves, only names in faded ledgers, old documents, families who spent the rest of their lives waiting for answers that never came. The frontier was not a land of heroes and villains. It was a place of survival, unforgiving, relentless. A world where everyone on every side did things that would scar the land for generations. The women who survived captivity carried it forever, in their bodies, in their silence, in the things they could not bring themselves to write even years later, even in the safety of home. Rachel Plummer said some memories were too painful to put into words. Matilda Lockhart's ruined face spoke without words. Olive Oatman's blue tattoo announced her history to everyone she ever met. They survived what should not have been survivable. They endured what should not have been endurable. They lived when so many others did not. History calls them victims, and they were, but they were also something else. They were survivors, they were witnesses. They were the ones who came back to tell us what happened in places no one else could see, places the rest of America preferred to forget. Their stories matter, their suffering matters, their courage matters. Because if we forget them, we forget the truth about who we were and who we are.